there are 4 teams with 11-1 records that all have pretty decent, respectable losses and also have some very respectable wins. And when you look at the resumes of these 4 teams, what the hell is the committee supposed to do on this? And I think
The
that's the question everyone's asking.
the expansion. We've talked about the expansion for years, right? And it actually is going to start happening and take place next year. Problem is, this is the year, the first time truly since we've had this college football playoff that they actually really do need it. There's been years where like Penn State was fifth and they got left out even though they won a head-to-head against Ohio State. But the eye test showed they probably didn't really deserve to be in. This year, I mean, you genuinely have 6 teams that have a fair argument as to why they should be in, regardless of what happens during this championship weekend. And it's a problem for the committee because somebody's going to get screwed over no matter how you put it, no matter what happens this weekend. Somebody is going to get screwed over, in my opinion, because these teams at the top, Georgia, Michigan, they're not unbeatable. So like let's, for example, if Michigan played Oregon or Washington, I wouldn't say it's a cakewalk. I wouldn't say they're just going to win, right? We saw, TCU beat them last year. Georgia this year is not the same Georgia we've seen. Are they still a very good football team? Of course. But any one of these teams you're seeing, Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, Alabama, could compete and beat Georgia. Michigan could beat Georgia. Like, it's Washington could even compete with Georgia. Like, there's teams that the committee has to take a look at. And I want to give you an example, John, of what could happen here, right? This is a very possible thing. Let's say Florida State wins the ACC and they're undefeated, right? They're down to their third string quarterback, it sounds like. Okay. Ohio State doesn't play this weekend because they lost, right? Let's say Oregon beats Washington. So they're the Pac-12 champs, and now those teams both have, Oregon has 1 loss, Washington has 1 loss. Texas wins the Big 12, and they have 1 loss, but they're a conference champ. And let's say Bama beats Georgia. Who the hell do you put in?
I have no clue. I seriously have no clue.
Like, who do you put in? I mean, that's a possibility to happen.
Right. Well, and what was my take at the beginning of the season, right? Is that the NCAA is going to need the expanded playoffs because NIL is going to make these programs more competitive and more close in talent to one another rather than less, right? Everybody thought NIL was just going to mean rich gets richer. If this season has shown us anything, it's been the exact opposite of that, right? I feel like this is the most competitive, as an NFL guy primarily, this is the most competitive college season that I have seen in recent memory, where I feel like,
no doubt,
Texas is the best they've been in a decade, right? Bama with 1 loss still obviously has a really good resume. Oregon's a legitimate contender for the first time since like the Mariota days. Obviously, Ohio State, Michigan just beat them, but like you said, they probably have the best resume on this board, and they're not even going to have a championship weekend game to continue to assert or prove that.
Yeah.
Who the hell do you put in?
There's so much, John. I mean, you're spot on, first of all, but there's so much wrong with the way this whole playoff idea was set up with 4 teams. When it was created to be 4 teams, you're right. It was pre-NIL, and there was not as much competition amongst the top. The top teams, there was 2 or 3 every single year that no doubt was going to be the teams that fought for national championship, right? And now you genuinely have 5 or 6 teams, maybe even 7 teams that could compete and win a national championship. And I wouldn't call you crazy if you said that you could see that team winning.
Right.
The main thing is, who do you punish here, right? You have Ohio State, who has 1 loss. They don't get a chance to play in a conference championship because their 1 loss was to the second best team in the country. Maybe
thank God they're fixing for that next year in the Big Ten too.
Right, right. But the whole thing of, do you punish Ohio State for that reason? For losing by, how much did they lose by? 5, 6 points?
6 points
to the number 2 team in the country in Ann Arbor in a rivalry game. So you punish them for that, or do you punish Texas, who has a head-to-head win against Alabama, but because the rest of their schedule wasn't as dominant and they didn't always look as clean, and they have a worse loss on their resume? Do you punish Texas even though they beat Alabama head-to-head if Bama and Texas both win? Do you punish Alabama for losing to Georgia in the national championship, in the SEC championship, and don't give them a chance to compete, even though you could probably argue eye test Alabama's maybe better than the Oregon, Texas, Washington teams we've seen? Do you punish Washington if they lose the Pac-12 championship? Because here's the thing, they're undefeated right now. Let's say Washington doesn't play in a Pac-12 championship. Ohio State's sitting at home with 1 loss. Washington's competing and playing, and if they lose, they're going to get punished for it. And Ohio State isn't. because they don't have to. They don't have a chance to lose a second game.
Right.
It's just the whole thing is just so screwed up, and every year it has been, and the committee's gotten away with it because there's usually been a top 4 teams pretty clear.
Right.
But we're gonna find out pretty quickly what the committee values, because Florida State, I think, is the biggest story with this, because they're undefeated. Their Heisman candidate quarterback is done for the year. Their second stringer is banged up. Sounds like he might not play this weekend in the conference championship game. And they're still favored to win that game, by the way. So if they win the ACC, which is in a down year overall, and they're undefeated, how can you not put them in? But the problem is, who do you leave out to put that team in? Because whoever they play in the playoff is probably going to whop them. They'll probably see Michigan or Georgia in the first round of the playoffs with a third string quarterback playing. You don't have a chance.
Right.
Nobody wants to see that. Nobody wants to see a non-competitive playoff game. I'd rather see Alabama get the 4 seed and take on Georgia again. Or I'd rather see Michigan jump up to 1 and take on, Ohio State again. I think that's, and it obviously comes down to money, and I think the committee will weigh that in too, right? They're going to try to find a way to sneak Ohio in or Texas in if they have the chance. But
so that's where I was going to go. So let's force ourselves to kind of come up with who we think is, work the hypotheticals and figure out, who we think should take this 4th spot. To me, I think Alabama versus Texas, head-on-head matchup. Sorry, Alabama. I think the odds just aren't in your favor here, right? And I think you're probably going to lose to Georgia in the championship, this weekend too.
Yeah, Bama loses, they're out. There's no way.
Bama loses, they're out. So so that discussion's over. Oregon, I think their record has been completely milquetoast, right? And so, yes, obviously they have a good loss with Washington, but I don't know. I don't totally see, based off of who they've played this season, that they really deserve to get in. So then that boils it down to Texas or Ohio State. And as you said, Mark, right, Texas is probably going to win their championship matchup. So they're 12-1, but they have a significantly worse resume than Ohio State. And I can't sit here and tell you that I don't think Ohio State doesn't deserve to be in, because you look at their wins of Notre Dame and Penn State and their one loss to the number 2 team in the country. I don't think anybody is nearly as stacked of a resume as them. When you even look at their records versus top 25, top 10, right? They're 2-1. So I wouldn't
say it's significant. I do agree that Ohio State's resume is probably better than Texas, but I wouldn't say it's significant. I mean, that win at Alabama is showing to be, because again, when these wins happen matter, but you got Texas went into Tuscaloosa and won that game. And obviously that was before Alabama really peaked. I think if Alabama and Texas played today, Alabama would win by 2 scores. But that's why these hypotheticals, it doesn't do you any good. And the committee is going to have the same conversation that you and I are having. And there is no right answer. That's the problem. Right. Is I don't think you can keep an Oregon or Washington out, because I think Oregon and Washington both would beat Texas right now. And it's tough, because if Oregon wins, then the Pac-12 is going to punish themselves if Oregon beats Washington, because then neither of those teams probably get in.
And so really quick, and pardon my ignorance, Texas is SEC next year, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, which, I mean, that's in my opinion, that's a factor too, right? And how they've stacked up against SEC and that kind of talent. So I don't know. It's tough.
Florida State's the one that's going to get screwed, because there is a chance, and there are some people out there calling for this, and I don't want to say it because I don't want to punish a team that goes undefeated just because of an injury, but Florida State most likely will win and be undefeated, 13-0, and maybe not get in the playoff. What else can you do other than win every single game you play? And your conference championship,
and it's good competition too.
I know it's not like it's bad. I mean, is it the best conference? No, probably one of the worst. But it's because what does the committee do? Do they put them in knowing they're going to get mollywopped by Michigan or Georgia in the first playoff game, and everyone knows it, and it's okay, was that really the best 4 teams? Because we've had that debate in recent years.
You can't say that if Michigan or Georgia has to play Bama or Texas or Ohio State or maybe even Oregon, right? I think Oregon.
Right. You
Honestly,
can't say
I test Oregon's the weakest of these 4 teams we're currently looking at, but I think
I don't
Oregon would
know.
beat Florida
I
State.
think Texas. I think Texas right now. I test
You think
is the
so?
weakest. Yeah.
I don't-
They've kind of digressed down.
Yeah.
Oregon has gotten better and better. Bo Nix is playing at a high level. I mean, I again, it's tough, but Florida State is the true test for me of the committee. Like, how important is the regular season? Because if you say that the regular season matters and you don't put Florida State in the playoff if they win, you are basically saying that the regular season does not matter at all. At the end of the day, we're just going to pick 4 teams that we think are the best 4 eye test wise. So it doesn't matter whether you win or lose.
Right.
Doesn't
You
matter
can't
if you
do
win
that.
your conference. I mean, I don't know, right? I don't know what they're going to do, but you also can't leave. If Alabama wins, it's going to throw a wrench in everything because you can't. If Alabama wins, you still got to put Georgia in with 1 loss because they're the defending back-to-back champs and they've won. I don't even know how many games in a row. You can't take them out. So if Alabama wins, which is very real possibility, Alabama wins. Georgia's in with Alabama. Michigan's in because they're going to whop Iowa. And then who else do you put? Do you put Ohio? Then you have 4 teams genuinely that you could argue, no matter what happens this weekend, could be in. Washington, Oregon, Texas, Ohio State, all could argue. Florida State too.
Emergency
5
18
teams.
playoff is the only.
I mean, call for it. Like, call for the just expand it. Let us have it. This is what we've always wanted.
Yeah,
I'm calling the committee out. They're getting exposed finally for doing this the wrong way to begin with and being slow moving to try to solve this problem, which they knew could eventually happen, and it finally is happening, and they're getting exposed just in the right time, and they're going to say, well, we already fixed it. Next year we'll be, next year we've got it, figured
You're
out.
right. One team is going to get royally screwed. So
Maybe 2 teams, depending on what happens with Alabama and depending on what happens with Florida State. If Florida State loses, it takes care of a lot of questions. And if Bama loses, it takes care of a lot of questions and it kind of bails out the committee. But if both those teams win, Bama and Florida State, and if Oregon wins, I have no idea what the hell what they're gonna do.
they're gonna drink a fifth of something and then just throw darts at a board of everybody that might be in the bubble. I have no clue what you're supposed to do here.
I love it though. I love it. I love the chaos.
Wanted me to show this meme really badly too.
John doesn't think it's that funny because he's a loser, but no, I think this is hilarious.
It is funny.
Like, somebody go take him down. Somebody's got to do it.